welcome to another deep dive. And wow, have we got a fascinating one for you all today.
It's really exciting.
We're tackling estate planning,
Yes.
which, is something that a lot of people think about.
Yeah.
What happens after you're gone, how to sort of set up your loved ones,
Mm-hmm.
and how to kind of, make sure that they're taken care of.
Absolutely.
And, obviously this could be a really complex topic.
Yeah.
With lots of different rules and regulations, and especially when you're talking about large estates,
Right.
it can get even more complicated. But it's also really important.
Super important.
So we're going to try to break it down for you today.
Yeah, make it easy.
And we're going to do that using a very, very iconic family as our example.
We are.
The Presleys.
Yep.
So, you brought this to us, and you were really interested in whether the protections built into Elvis's original trust
Yeah.
extended to his granddaughters.
Specifically, yeah. It's a great question because it gets to the heart of how these long-term financial strategies are meant to adapt and function over time.
Exactly. And we've got some great source material here. We have details from Elvis's actual will.
Wow.
We have information about subsequent trusts created by his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley.
Okay.
So our mission, if you will,
Yeah.
is to trace that path of trust protection in the Presley family, specifically from Elvis,
Right.
down to his granddaughters, based on what you've shared with us.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So let's jump right in. Let's start at the beginning with the king.
Okay.
His original plan.
Yeah.
What did Elvis's initial trust structure look like?
So Elvis's 1977 will set out the initial beneficiaries of the trust.
Mm-hmm.
The primary beneficiaries were his daughter, Lisa Marie Presley,
Okay.
his father, Vernon Presley, and his grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley.
Gotcha. Okay, so the immediate family there.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that Vernon, Elvis's father, he had kind of like a dual role. He was the executor of the will, so responsible for managing the estate initially,
Right.
and also the trustee of the trust.
Okay.
So tasked with managing the assets over time.
Gotcha.
He also had the discretion to allocate funds to other family members in case of emergencies.
Okay, so there was a little bit of wiggle room there.
Yeah, a little bit of flexibility built in.
Okay. So it sounds like the immediate focus was really on supporting his closest living relatives at that time.
Exactly. Taking care of his own.
Yep. And obviously, as life goes, things change.
For sure.
So within a few years of Elvis's death, both Vernon and Minnie Mae Presley passed away,
Sadly.
which leaves Lisa Marie as the sole primary beneficiary
Right.
of the original Elvis Presley Trust.
Yeah, consolidating everything under her.
Right. Which, on the one hand, kind of simplifies things a little bit. But, on the other hand,
Yeah.
it must have been a lot of pressure for her
Huge responsibility.
to manage this inheritance, to be responsible for, all of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Elvis's will also contained a spendthrift provision.
Yes.
What exactly is the purpose of that, and how did it operate within his estate plan?
So a spendthrift provision is really important.
Okay.
This one's found in item IX of Elvis's will, and it's very broadly worded.
Okay.
It basically said that no beneficiary's interest in the trust, whether it's the principal, the assets, or the income generated, can be touched by creditors.
Okay.
They can't be subject to legal processes like lawsuits,
Okay.
and can't be transferred voluntarily or involuntarily by the beneficiaries themselves, except as permitted by the will.
So essentially it's a fortress.
Yeah, a financial fortress.
Yeah. Protecting that inheritance
Absolutely.
from external claims, and I guess also protecting the beneficiary from themselves potentially.
Right, exactly. It's designed to stop beneficiaries making rash decisions that could deplete their assets. All right.
It's a very common tool in estate planning.
Okay.
Protecting inheritance, not just from creditors, but also from mismanagement or unforeseen circumstances,
Right.
like bankruptcy or significant debt,
So you're trying to kind of think of every possibility.
as much as you can.
Yeah, and plan for that.
Exactly.
Okay. So Elvis's will didn't just address his immediate beneficiaries.
Wow.
Obviously, Lisa Marie was still quite young when he passed away.
Right.
What did his will outline regarding, future children?
So item 50 addresses this.
Okay.
It says that once both his father and grandmother had passed, which they did, the main body of the trust would be split into separate equal trusts.
Okay.
One for each of his surviving children,
Mm-hmm.
and another to benefit the living descendants of any child who had died.
Okay.
So in this case, Lisa Marie was his only child.
Right.
So this provision, once her father and grandmother were gone, would effectively have created a trust just for her,
Gotcha.
with the understanding that her children would inherit eventually. So he was thinking long-term.
Yeah, definitely thinking about lineage.
About legacy, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. You know, when you're planning your estate, you're thinking about not only, who's going to get what now,
Yeah.
but also how is this going to affect
Future generations.
future generations. Yeah. Okay. But I recall reading that Elvis's original trust wasn't intended to last indefinitely.
You're right.
Right.
It wasn't.
It wasn't meant to just go on forever.
No.
So tell me about that.
So item IZE said that the trust created for each child, in this case Lisa Marie, would end automatically when they turned 25.
Okay.
At that point, the assets would be given to them outright.
No strings attached.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. So Lisa Marie turned 25 in 1993.
She did.
And as we know, reportedly inherited about $100 million at that time.
Yes, substantial sum.
Yeah. So, and that event also triggers the automatic end
Correct.
of Elvis's original trust.
Exactly. It dissolved.
Gone.
Gone.
Done. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a really important point, right?
It is.
That Elvis's original safety net for Lisa Marie had a built-in expiration date.
Yeah, it was meant to protect her until she reached a certain age.
Right. And then she was on her own.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, this is where things get interesting, I think,
It does.
in terms of generational wealth.
Yes.
Because Lisa Marie, she didn't just manage that inheritance directly, right?
No, she didn't. She made her own estate planning moves.
Right. Okay, so tell me about that.
So when she got her inheritance in 1993, Lisa Marie set up her own trust.
Okay.
It was initially called the Elvis Presley Trust, which can cause some confusion.
Yeah, for sure.
But over time, it was changed and became known as the Promenade Trust.
The Promenade Trust. Okay, so just to be crystal clear here,
Yeah.
the Promenade Trust is completely separate
Totally separate.
from her father's original spendthrift trust.
It is.
Right, which by this point is dissolved.
Long gone.
Right. That's such an important distinction to make.
Absolutely crucial.
Because it's not like, the protections from Elvis's trust automatically transferred over to Lisa Marie's trust.
They don't.
Right.
Any protection for Lisa Marie's daughters would have to be spelled out in her own Promenade Trust,
Right. Okay.
not carried over from her father's trust.
So who was initially in charge of this Promenade Trust?
So the initial trustees were Lisa Marie's mother, Priscilla Presley,
Okay.
and her business manager, Barry Siegel.
Gotcha. Okay.
They were in charge during a really big moment for the trust, the 2005 sale of 85% of Elvis Presley Enterprises.
Right. So EPE.
EPE.
Yeah. A huge deal.
Massive.
Really reshaping what the estate looked like at that point.
Completely changing the landscape.
Okay. So let's fast forward a bit to 2016.
Okay.
Another pivotal moment, right?
Yeah.
What happened with Lisa Marie's trust then?
So in 2016, Lisa Marie made an amendment to her trust documents.
Okay.
This amendment was to remove Priscilla Presley and Barry Siegel as trustees.
Okay. And replace them with her children, Riley Keough and Benjamin Keough.
And this, as I recall, is where the legal challenges started to come up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Priscilla Presley challenged this.
She did.
So what were her concerns about this particular amendment?
So Priscilla Presley contested this amendment on a few grounds. She said she didn't get proper notification of the change.
Okay.
She also said there were inconsistencies in the document itself, like her name being misspelled.
Uh-huh.
And what she said was an unusual signature from Lisa Marie.
Okay.
She also raised concerns about the document not being properly witnessed or notarized.
Which, of course, is incredibly important.
It's crucial.
Yeah, for legal documents.
Absolutely.
Estate planning documents in particular,
Yeah,
right?
especially, though,
You want to make sure everything is by the book.
by the letter of the law.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're inviting challenges.
Right. And that's exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
So how did this all shake out? What was the final outcome of this legal challenge? Well, they eventually reached a settlement.
Okay.
And as part of that, Riley Keough was appointed the sole trustee of Lisa Marie's Promenade Trust.
Okay.
And Priscilla Presley became a special advisor to the trust.
Gotcha.
So Riley took over.
Right. Okay, so Riley's now in charge of her mother's trust.
She is.
Okay, so let's go back to our original question.
Okay.
Does Lisa Marie's Promenade Trust contain a spendthrift provision for her beneficiaries, her daughters?
This is the key thing, and it's not definitively answered in what you've given me.
Right, okay.
The sources describe the trust, the trustees, and the legal issues.
Yeah.
But they don't say for sure whether Lisa Marie included a spendthrift clause in the Promenade Trust documents for her daughters.
Okay, but, as we talked about earlier, it is a pretty standard thing.
It's very common
to include.
especially when there's a lot of wealth involved.
Right.
And the goal is to protect future generations.
Yeah, you've been through it yourself. You kind of learn from experience, right?
Exactly. You want to safeguard your kids.
Yeah. So it seems likely she would have considered it.
It would make sense.
But we can't say for certain.
We can't without seeing the actual Promenade Trust documents.
Right. Okay, so when Lisa Marie passed away, who was set to inherit what was left of her estate?
So when Lisa Marie died, her remaining estate, including her 15% of EPE and all of Graceland, was supposed to go to her 3 daughters, Riley Keough,
Okay.
and the twins, Harper and Finley Lockwood. Her son, Benjamin, had sadly died earlier.
Right. And, that inheritance is governed by the terms of the Promenade Trust.
Exactly.
With Riley now the sole trustee.
Right. So any question of spendthrift protection for Lisa Marie's granddaughters depends entirely on what Lisa Marie herself put in her trust documents.
Right. So Elvis's original provision is irrelevant at this point.
It doesn't apply anymore.
Okay. Now, one of the articles mentioned that Lisa Marie might have taken an approach similar to her father's when it came to her younger daughters.
Yeah.
What did they mean by that?
So one article suggested that Lisa Marie might have set up the inheritances for her twins so that they're held in trust until they become adults.
Okay.
Like Elvis did for her until she turned 25.
Right.
It implies that Lisa Marie thought carefully about protecting her daughters financially and maybe used trusts to manage the money on their behalf until they're older.
So we can't be sure about the spendthrift clause for all 3 daughters.
We can't.
But there are signs that, at least for the twins, their inheritance might be managed within a trust structure.
Yeah, there's that suggestion.
Which provides some level of protection.
It does.
Okay.
But the definitive answer, the specific terms, the existence of a spendthrift provision, all that depends on the exact wording of the Promenade Trust.
Right, and unfortunately we don't have that.
We don't.
Okay. Well, let's kind of try to sum up what we've learned today.
Okay.
This deep dive into the Presley estate.
Yeah.
So Elvis Presley's original spendthrift trust was meant to protect his family, especially Lisa Marie, until she turned 25.
Yeah.
At that point, it dissolved automatically.
Correct.
Any protections now for her daughters would be determined by the terms of her own Promenade Trust.
Right, her own document.
And while there are hints that she might have included protective measures, maybe even setting up trusts for her younger daughters until they're adults, like her father did for her, we don't have confirmation of a specific spendthrift clause for any of them.
Not from these sources.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really interesting, right?
It is.
Because it shows how estate planning is not just a one-time thing.
No.
It's something that kind of evolves.
Goes through generations.
Through generations, yeah.
Each person makes their own decisions.
Right. And, we've just looked at one very, very specific case.
Yeah, high-profile example.
High-profile example, yeah.
But it shows the principles.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And I think, for anyone listening, no matter how big or small your estate is,
Right.
this is something to think about.
Absolutely.
How you want things handled after you're gone.
Yeah, and making sure your wishes are followed.
Exactly.
And that your loved ones are secure.
Exactly. And making sure it's all done legally and properly so you don't have any challenges.
Yeah, avoid any nasty surprises down the line.
Right, exactly. This whole exploration of the Presley estate, from Elvis's intentions to the situation with his granddaughters, really highlights how important clear estate planning is.
It's essential.
It can get really complex.
It can be a minefield.
It can be a minefield. And I think, it's a good reminder for everyone to take a closer look at their own understanding of estate planning.
Absolutely.
And the protections available.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you for walking us through this.
No problem at all. I enjoyed it.
And that brings us to the end of another deep dive.
Another one done.
We hope you found it insightful and that it gave you some food for thought.
Lots to think about.
Lots to think about, right?
Yeah.
The ins and outs of trusts.
Spendthrift clauses.
Spendthrift clauses. Legacies.
It's a big topic.
It is a big topic.
Yeah.
And hopefully this inspires you to do a little digging of your own.
Yeah, some research.
Yeah, to learn more. Until next time.
See you then.
Bye, y'all.